of our magazine or journal, The Large Glass. So thank you, Bojana, for being here. I'm gonna leave you now on the floor for you. I'm just gonna mention that we structured the event like first we're gonna have her lecture, and after that I'm gonna pose her several questions, and after that I'm gonna invite you also to make comments, also pose questions, share your opinions, etc. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivana. Can you hear me better like this or like this? Like this, okay. Good evening, everybody. It's very nice to be in Skopje again, even though, as Ivana said, it's the first time we collaborate in the museum, but we did other things in the city. Before, I will also mention some of these events that we did here, and also thank you to the museum for the invitation, of course. So it will be in English, as Ivana said. So this, what I'll be saying is related to what I wrote, even though I put a little bit more examples here, so I could explain more what my argument was for the text, more with examples from our exhibitions and from our collections. So how I started this with a question, and the question was, I will come to the question a little bit later, but I wanted to start that with the fact that many institutions, including art institutions, have been changing and looking for new direction on how to continue with their research, with their collecting, with their exhibiting, and knowledge dissemination. With other words, how to be more open. And a lot has been written about these new prototypes in the last decade, or even more than a decade, about the new kinds of institutionality. New, more democratic museum models have been discussed at length. For example, Museum of the Commons, Sustainable Museum, Decolonized Museum, Constituent Museum, Situated Museum, and so on and so forth. But the question is it actually possible to overcome this dichotomy between the inside and the outside of the institution? And then how do we reflect, or how should we reflect on the opening that this very often conflictual relation provide? And then also how to deal with the new forms of political experience. Also, for example, in the light of the current situation in the Middle East, in Palestine, in crisis, in war, in genocide. Because in current situation, it has become difficult for museums to remain relevant and true to what they stand for, because, as you know, the majority of art institutions in the West have, in the case of Palestine, remained silent. And in addition, what is happening is a complete censorship or even criminalization of Palestinian voices. And this silence and censorship only keep a status quo of an art institution as a colonial institution of exclusion. But I wanted to start with this image because in Modernă Галерија we have quite, for a long time, collaboration with Palestinian institutions, art institutions, with artists, curators. So when all we started in Palestine, in Gaza, we said we will provide space also for Palestinian voices. So we hosted some events, film screening of Palestinian films, and then when it was the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, we put this on our socials, and up there is what the comments were. We received many positive responses, and not, I would say, very few negative ones. So let's focus now, more specifically on our region. I think it's important to emphasize this fact that when we discuss collections and acquisitions, as well as other museological procedures, which also include, of course, exhibition making, that cultural politics in socialist countries until the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989, when the geopolitics changed significantly, were different from cultural politics from the western parts of the world. But again, Yugoslavia was different even from those Eastern cultural politics, Eastern European cultural politics, because, as you know, 48 Yugoslavia broke with the Soviet Union. That affected it greatly, and that was also one of the reasons why Yugoslavia took an alternative path and was one of the founders of the non-aligned movement in 1961. So in 1955, I found this image in the Children's Encyclopedia from 1961. It's quite interesting. In 1951, there were, I like this, I don't know if you can see it well, there's some statistic about cultural scene, but there were 251 museums in Yugoslavia, and 53 of them were art museums, and that includes also our museum in Ljubljana, Moderne Галерија, which was officially founded in 1947 and opened in 1948. This is that building there. It's a little bit different, the front is a little bit different than today, because as you see in 48 it had a nice pools and some kind of exotic plants were planted. This is all gone. And what is also interesting, this is from our photo archives. In 1968 there was an exhibition called Modern American Art, something like that, in our museum. And look at this, how they put the American flag on the facade. I think it's quite unimaginable in any other Eastern European country to have a flag like this in the main national museum. And this below is our new, we call it new building, even though it's actually older than Moderne Галерија. This was an old army barrack in Metelkova, if you've ever been to Љubljana, which was given to Moderne Галерија in 1990s and then renovated. In 2011 it became our second unit, a so-called Museum of Contemporary Art, Metelkova. So I said Moderne Галерија is formed after the Second World War, and until 91, Moderne Галерија is basically collecting works of artists from Slovenia only. So to say, it was a museum with a national collection, and this also included at the time a small collection of works from artists from other Yugoslav republics. And these works were acquired as an exchange and transfer of artworks between Yugoslav republics. It's a very small collection. It contains 136 works. They're mainly sculptures, paintings, drawings, graphics, and they were not shown for a long time. I think since 90s these works haven't been shown in our museum. And I really like this one. This work is by Decolonizing. It's from 1933, and you see, interestingly, how the painting got to Moderne Галерија. First, it was purchased by the Rauska Banovina, which has given it to National Gallery in Ljubljana, and the National Gallery gave it to Moderne Галерија in 1950. And there were also other works that we have in the, maybe for you interesting, is beside Nikola Martinovski, there's Petar Hadžiboško, Ilja Kosto, Dušan Perčinkov, and there was in 1979 a big exhibition. I think it was the last such exhibition that included so many artists from Macedonia, and that was a traveling exhibition that went to Sarajevo, Dubrovnik, Ljubljana, Moderne Галерија. And then we looked in the documentation, we looked at the catalog and realized there was only one woman present at this exhibition, and that was artist Mira Svirovska, with a nice tapestry works. 1991, the situation with Moderne Галерија and the cultural scene in Slovenia changes significantly. This is also the time when Zdenka Vodovinac takes over the directorship. Zdenka Vodovinac was the director of Moderne Галерија until a few years ago. And then also with Igor Zabel, who was important curator in Moderne Галерија, they started to rethink conceptually what a museum should be. So the museum became a very active link between the local and the international, in particular Central and Eastern European context. And they also developed this concept of museum of contemporary art, emphasizing parallel narratives, meaning that there's not just one main narrative about art histories, about art development, and self-historization, which is an important term for us, for Moderne Галерија. I will also, I think, speak a little bit later about it. But at the same time, in the 90s, it was not only Moderne Галерија that started questioning the collection and actually the position of the museum in this new kind of geopolitical circumstances, but there were also other museums in non-Western parts of the world that started more or less questioning the idea of universal museum based on position of power, which of course also included collections. And the idea, I mean, above all, it was this reflection on how to juxtapose their local histories and specific artistic expressions with their Western counterparts, but in a way that would allow equal dialogue. I think this is very important also when we think of self-historization. And of course, Saatchi's Moderne Галерија Artist 2000 Plus collection, which began in the late 1990s and had successfully found its position between the Western art canon and the Eastern European model of national museums, focusing on local avant-garde context, but also taking into consideration international trends. And Artist 2000 Plus is the first collection of its kind. Here are some images. Maybe if I go back, you saw one of the images before this orange building. This used to be this is the Army Barrack, that is now the Museum of Contemporary Art. And in 2000, we had the first exhibition of the collection in this building. So we basically entered the building and we still found everything that the Yugoslav National Army left there. So it was a real challenge how to do the collection, how to do the setup. So below is one image from that original setting. Of course, today it's very different. So this is from the new building. And also with the collection in 2000 Plus, it's not that the collection is like a static. It's not that it's a permanent collection. We don't call it that, but we change it all the time. So basically once or twice a year, we change it, but not the whole collection. Maybe we just change one part, or we invite an artist or some curator to do a little contribution or change or intervention. So that's also this work that we have. So why is the importance of the collection? And I go back to this notion of self-historization. It's that it changed the previously held notion of an Eastern European artist who was no longer seen as an incompletely developed Westerner, but as an empowered other. And at the same time, it became clear, and I think it's very much still holds true today, it's not enough to wait for some powerful institution, say from the West, to discover what we on the peripheries of Western art world do and think, what we keep as material or immaterial memories and traces in our collection and archives, and consequently represent us in those places of power in a way that we might not find appropriate, but instead that we do the homework ourselves first. The collection includes around 500 works. They date from late 50s until today, and they focus mostly on Eastern European neo-avant-garde and also our region. But also it includes artists from the West, which that's how the collection started, which was in a dialogical relationship with works from Eastern Europe. So the exhibition was also shown abroad. It was shown in Germany, in Austria, in Russia, and also here in Macedonia in 2002. It was shown in Çifte Aman, and it was in dialogue with works of Macedonian artists. And I have to say, this is self-criticism as well, that we only have one artist from Macedonia in our collection. Sadly, we hope to change this soon. And this is Oliver Musovic, and the work is Neighbors. But recently there have been some questions. We had lots of questions actually about the collection, but more or less there are questions about Eastern Europe. What is Eastern Europe in terms of political, cultural context. And these questions have become, again, the burning topic, and it's also important questions in terms what to do with this collection. Is it still relevant to continue with the original idea of Eastern European artists? That was the focus in 1990s and 2000, because it's become clear that other Easts should also be considered and conceptualized, and artworks from other Easts included in the collection. And in regard to those questions, we have focused next year, and maybe it will go further on. So that's our focus in the museum, and we call the series East of East, and it will include exhibition and summer school and conference, etc. But we also try to do it with partners, collaborators, and now we have our partner, at least for some of these events, with the Qatar Foundation from Amman and Palestine. But now I go to the recent exhibition that was in our museum. We opened it in January, and it was based on a reflection about collection and their exhibitions, and specifically about Mодерна Galeria's collection. It was called Exercises in a Collection. It consisted of three main topics, three main parts. First was Yugoslav culture of diplomacy, where included works from our so-called Yugoslav collection that haven't been shown for over 30 or even more years. We have a very nice Dušan Đamonja, Anka Bešić, and Petar Barda. And of course there were other works, but I'm just showing some. And then we also included works from the, it's not a very good image, but maybe you can imagine what is there. It's works from the collection of the non-aligned countries in Podgorica. And this whole setting is it's actually an exhibition that we did together in Podgorica a year before, and it's called Collection in Constellation, and we also shown this in Skopje last year in the exhibition that we did in Ivana and Prošon Opera in ballet. So that was his first part, cultural diplomacy. The second part, the second part was works from the collection from the 90s, sculptural works. These are mostly works of artists from the West. So you see here Šoškić and some part of Kožarić installation and Bustamante. But then the third part was works, recent purchases from the collection, and also work that would, at some point, we would like to have in our collection. And this work you probably recognize. It's work by Kristina Ivanovska. It's not the whole work, it's just the one view on the installation. And then this is the work of Jelena Micic. This was also a nice installation that we showed. So what this exhibition actually tried to emphasize, and it put forward the idea that works of art and displays are not something static, not something permanent with univocal meaning and ways of seeing, but that works of art need to be considered and thought about over and over, displayed in various ways, in diverse constellations and concepts. And in recent years, as I already mentioned at the beginning, there have been approaches to decolonizing museums and collections, especially Western museums as a big topic, as well as the knowledge produced within these institutions through inclusion of diverse perspectives, narrative, histories, and many of which have been historically omitted and ignored. Another ongoing process concerned the construction of the concept of the universal museum based on power imbalances, the unrestricted accumulation of art from around the world, and the patronizing definition of the other. Similarly, the presenting of non-Western art as mere illustrations or affinities of Western works have become highly problematic, and indicative of an outdated notion of the superiority of Western art. And I think also big museums in the West, of course, they realized all these questions. And in MoMA, if any of you saw the previous setup of the permanent collection, it was exactly like this. So Western works, and then there were some works from other parts of the world that illustrated these Western works. And I think they tried with the new setup of works from their collection to change this. I haven't seen this new setup, so I cannot say what it is like. But so just to mention one case that changes are happening. But in our region, of course, in many regards, we are very specific. So we have kind of other approaches and other ways of doing things too. And it shouldn't be in this regard forgotten that these debates that I just mentioned had already taken place within the non-aligned movement decades earlier. Of course, they were discussed in a little bit different way, and they have never been implemented fully, but also they have not been yet sufficiently explored. So that's another story that Modernā Galērija that we have been quite intensely researching in this past 10 years or so. And this, of course, is a story that is different from the Eastern European art narrative. As I mentioned, it's quite obvious the difference between Western and Eastern European art was not a difference in styles, in canons. This difference between two different political and economic ideologies was mainly in regard to the art system, to the conditions of art production, and access to official art histories. And the distance between East and West was actually less than the difference between them and art of every other place in the world, especially in former colonies or the global South. So this other story is the story of the non-aligned movement, or more precisely, the focus of this research has been non-aligned cultural politics. And I don't know if I should say something about this movement. The movement was, it started in '61 with the first meeting in Belgrade. Here are the participants, and I always say when I do this kind of lectures that there's only one woman, and it's of Sri Lanka. And later on there have been many more in the movement, so that's one thing. But that was a coalition of small and there were middle-sized states. They were mostly former colonies. They were developing countries from the global South, and they included Yugoslavia, which was one of the key members, and basically the only one from Europe. Later on, '73, as you can see, this red are the members, already more members, and then later on even more in '79, almost 100. So how this movement functioned as a kind of social movement in the international system, it's the third way between the two blocks, and with the idea to change the existing global structure, to create more just, more equal, peaceful world order, but it was in its essence an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, anti-racist movement. Non-aligned still exists today. It's basically an anachronism. It's completely, how to say, like a ghost. It has more countries than ever, 125, I think it's the number. And you know, to tell you who is the member from Europe, it's Belarus and Azerbaijan, who's currently leading the non-aligned movement. And I checked, because Palestine is still a full-time member since 1974, and they haven't produced any single statement about it, so that tells you something. But, you know, when we talk about non-aligned, I think we refer all of us to this first 3 decades from the 60s until 1989, when all this situation, geopolitical, changed. But anyway, let me show you this image. exchange, the cultural exchanges. It's maybe more interesting for us today to discuss. These countries from the non-aligned, they were very culturally diverse. But this newly established context and exchanges between them provided very fertile ground for debates on the globally dominant Western culture and other cultures. And this was already the case at the beginning, so from the early 1660s on. Culture was given specific importance in the non-aligned movement, even though it was never discussed, it was never at the foreground at the summits. But nevertheless, I can tell you few things that the members considered. For example, in 1961, there is a summit in Cairo. An important point for them in terms of culture was cultural equality. Do you want a tangerine to start here? So cultural equality, and then there was a Colombo summit in '76, and this Colombo summit emphasized restitution, where the members they called for return of works of art to the countries from which they have been looted. And as you know, restitution is a big topic still today. And then the Havana conference, that's actually Tito who spoke of struggle for decolonization. But then later summits, they focused specifically on cultural heritage, preservation of this heritage, cultural cooperation among the non-aligned states, and so on. This is one research project. It was quite big. It was done by my colleague from Modernă, галерија, Thea Merher, and she researched this in various archives around the region, but mostly in the museum, mostly not in the museum, but in the archive of Yugoslavia in Belgrade. So what she did is she tried to find all these manifestations, exchanges, cultural programs that Yugoslavia had with the non-aligned countries. And at some point, Yugoslavia signed 56 agreements with those countries. And as you can see, these are, they're listed, the exhibitions, some, not all of them, but some exhibitions and traveling exhibitions that were happening. The only really institution that was established directly under the auspices of the non-aligned movement was the Podgorica non-aligned collection. That was established in 1984. And all the works they received were donations. They have around 850 works from all over. This collection has recently become again accessible to researchers, but I was there last year, even before we collaborated together, but I can tell you this collection really has some amazing, really amazing works, the most important works, modernist works from many places around the world. They have an amazing collection of works from Egypt, women artists that studied, the first generation that studied in Alexandria. Also they have an amazing collection from India and also from some Latin American countries. So it's really, if you have a chance to see this collection. This research work was included in the exhibition that we did. That was a result of all these researches, and that was that exhibition, Southern Constellation, the Poetics of the Non-Aligned. It happened in 2019. It included a variety of works. Mainly there were research works, historical works from around the world. There were some biennials, there were some other collections. For example, this is the Indonesian donation that was donated. It's also part of this non-aligned cultural politics exchanges to Koroška Galerija, that is a small museum in the north of Slovenia. We also included or invited Museum of African Art, that is also part of that consideration of non-aligned cultural politics and Yugoslav exchanges and collaboration with non-aligned countries. They did the setup. That's another one. But we also included contemporary works, and that's the work of Maria Berrios and Jakob Jakobsen. It's a new work, it's an installation, but it's based on the historical festival, Cultural Congress of Havana. That was a festival that happened there in 1968, where also discussed all these things that we are talking about today, decolonization and so on. And what the exhibition actually revealed that the main significance of the non-aligned network in culture was the rejection of the colonial project, which also deeply affected art and culture. The many events that took place within the network proved that there was no universal modernism and no linear development in the arts of the global south. But nevertheless, this rich cultural production based on local traditions, histories, influenced the development of modernism and its various forms of expression. But my interest, maybe besides this historical research, I think I'm a little bit done with that. I don't know, maybe other researchers needs to be done, but I'm more interested now, I would say, to the question of non-aligned contemporaneity. That is the possibility to rethink, revise, reuse some of these movements, emancipatory ideas in the present. And then we did the whole series of the Southern Constellation exhibitions. After Љубљана, there was the one in Gwangju in South Korea that focused more specifically on the Asian context. And then this was the one that we did with Ivana last year. And there's one image also from the non-aligned collection. And then we did one in Ramallah last year with Yazid Anani. And then there were one in London, in Rijeka, and maybe I forgot something like that. But this exhibition, they're always, the way I wanted to do these exhibitions was they were always done in collaboration, in co-curatorship, and very much emphasizing local context, local specificities, local histories, but also with an aim that we create some kind of maybe larger transnational network. And this was also one of the ideas that emerged. This was the idea of exhibition as a constellation and collection as a constellation, which would be a fair way of doing things together so that everyone learns, gains from being involved in these endeavors, not just a privileged few. So that it is, the idea is, of course, that this constellation to bring together peripheral institutions, initiatives, spaces, organizations, collectives that share common political and social goals and similar conditions of art production, usually with small budgets and operating in fragile political circumstances. So, but of course, we've been talking about all these beautiful ideas, emancipatory potential, etc., etc. But achieving any real change in the existing art system requires more than simply introducing new, say, undiscovered themes, geographies, while at the same time still repeating the old exhibition formats. And also the methodologies, knowledge and histories must also be challenged along with authorities that legitimize those histories, knowledges and methodologies, and these authorities are us, of course, so we need to decolonize ourselves too. But then again, you know, what happens when this happens, when, like in Mодерна галерија, we had the exhibition, political performance that both Ivana and Linda were part of. There were 10 curators. And at the end of the exhibition, which was, by the way, very difficult to make because it was a time of difficult political situation, right-wing conservative government, the change of directorship in Mодерна галерија, with censorship, with silencing the voices, etc., etc. Difficult time for us in Mодерна. So what happened at the end, to emphasize this situation, Maja Smrekar did this performance. It was a participatory performance. Many of us participated for many, many hours. And at the exhibition, there were 120 artists, and there were more than 400 works. And what we did, on 800 square meters, we covered every single artwork with black cloth. And I think it was a really powerful statement. And this was we left it like this for a couple of days, but this was the closing performance. And kind of everyone who saw it realized why the statement. I mean, it was very symbolic. It was, I think, a very strong statement. So even though you do all this homework with museums, they colonize everything, and then this happens, and then what do you do? So I don't have an answer. Maybe I will finish, but I maybe just want to say, I will show these 2 slides. I have 2 slides. They're not that current. It's from a year or so ago, but then these are various notes from various discussions on museums and similar topics and similar discussions than we did as today. But I wanted to say that in the history, why non-aligned movement, maybe that, and then I finish. Because throughout history, there have been, of course, models for organizing counterpowers, for doing things differently, and for obtaining empowerment through counter models. In this respect, there are, of course, many similarities with the historical, cultural, and artistic networks of the non-aligned. So while learning from the movement's visionary, powerful, utopian, emancipatory proposals might seem like looking at some distant horizons, we must remember that there was once the prospect of another world, of great promise, of different dreams and hopes, where everything seemed possible, imagining a better and fairer world, which unfortunately, I think today is not the case anymore. So I will finish with that. Thank you for listening to me, and then we can have some discussion.
Well, thank you really, Bojana, for this inspiring lecture. As I mentioned in the beginning, I would like to pose several questions to Bojana, but if there is some burning question from you, I will also leave the floor to you maybe first.
Will you start first?
Okay.
Do you want to talk into this?
But don't ask me questions.
Well, I was talking to this because I think they are filming it, so I think it's better. So, there is something really profoundly revealing in the statement that you made, or the distance between East and West was actually less than the difference between them and art of every other place in the world, especially in the former colonies, that is the global South. So when you were talking about the story of the non-aligned movement. And here I would like to ask you to go a bit deeper, especially into the notions of epistemic colonialism and cultural imperialism, which for me are the most vividly illustrated through the Fanon space, turn white or disappear. This post-Yugoslav context has forgotten that once solidarity with the global South was on the surface in the public discourse in Yugoslavia. Can you tell us from your extensive research how the former colonies tried to get rid of epistemic colonialism, how strong were the influences from the country's colonizers and every other country in the world in those days, and what kind of situation in our days the countries of the global South? And also, like, this is also my personal interest, how is Yugoslavia also helping maybe in this, to get rid of the colonial rule?
Ivana, how long do you want me to talk now? This was like the whole lecture. I think I forgot the first part, I'm joking. But yes, you know, when I started doing this research, I didn't have a clue about this global South, art, the colonial, whatever, you know, they never were interested that much in that kind of art. We didn't learn anything at university. But then when you dig into all these archives, when you go to depots, when you see artworks, then it's really start getting your imagination, and you start wondering, and you start researching. And I found quite so many things in all these archives that still lie forgotten and non-digitized, and some boxes and some archives everywhere around our former common country. And for example, when you asked what did these former colonies do to get rid of this colonial influence also in arts, well, depends, because they're very different. Yeah. Usually, their art system was based on Western art system. So that means that they sent their artists to the West. Artists went to the West, or if they have schools, they were with teachers coming from the West, or someone who was schooled there, so it was this perpetual circle. But there was one extreme case that happened in Congo, which was renamed Zaire, with Mobutu Sese Seko. And they said, and he said the following: we will just cut everything, what we have been taught in this colonial art, we don't care, we will do our own thing. So what they do, they go back, they just made this, they go back in the past, and they say our contemporary art will be now based on our traditional arts. And they called this, how you say, direction, l'authenticité. So it will be authentic. So this was going on for some time until he was adieu. But then the interesting thing, he was not stupid, this Mobutu Sese Seko, because he realized that with this kind of new art, he needs, attention. That this new art needs to be known to the world. So what he does, of course, he probably loved it a lot and made a lot of money. But they organized the first ICA Congress in Africa in Zaire. So I talked to some people from Slovenia who went there, and they said it was crazy. It was absolute madness what we did there.
In what sense?
Feasts, going to villages, looking at traditional dances. And I don't know, maybe the memories of these people were a little bit, it was a long time ago, but they said they saw everything just not far. But anyway, so this guy, Mobutu Sese Seko, he had the vision. But in other countries, for example, I don't know, Indonesia, I talk to people and I know some artists, also from this older generation. They combined influences. They combined Western, their traditional, their local. So that was mainly what was happening in these non-aligned countries. And of course, it was not understood in the West as art. That's the thing. Even in the graphic Bojana in Ljubljana, so open, including, they claim they include arts from everywhere around the world, from East, from West, from South. But then when you research how the works were actually placed at this exhibition, you see that in this nice exhibition spaces, you have School of Paris, you have, I don't know, works from Switzerland, from Germany, and so on. And then in the basement, it's really kind of like, they put arts from the non-aligned. And this is because they didn't understand that. I'm sure of that, because from what I read, they saw this too figurative, because they were doing abstractions, this and that, and these arts are too figurative, and they kind of don't go with what they kind of imagined the graphic biennial topics would be, and so on and so on. So this was the case, and also I checked the prices, the graphic biennial prices. The artists from the non-aligned, they never won main prize. They maybe won like prize, like I don't know, from Yugoslav Art Center in Belgrade. They bought some of them, something like that. But in general, no. And also the works in the non-aligned collection in Podgorica. I mean, you read the archive, you read Jerko de Negri's text in the paper. He said this is basically with my how do you say, not interpretation, but yeah, I can say that from this article that he gave an interview or something like that. Basically, he said this is shit. This museum should be closed, and this is works from exotic countries, and they're not interested. And why do we care? We give money somewhere else. And there was Momo Kappa. He was even worse, and he said this is just works of friendly cannibals from Africa. It's horrible, right? Read this. Well, they were seeing this artwork, but yeah, that's. And then you ask me how Yugoslavia helped. Yugoslavia was, because there were different kinds of solidarities within the non-aligned. There was economic solidarity, there was political solidarity, and the cultural solidarity. They did exhibitions, they did did various things. They did send artists to various biennials. They enabled that, exchanges and so on. There were students studying from various parts of the non-aligned Yugoslavia, also art students.
And the other part of this question is, how do you explain the desperate desire to be seen and to belong to the Western art world, even adopting some kind of self-colonized status along this determination? And in what ways this yearning and all the actions accompanying it was beneficial, if it was at all?
That's a difficult question. I mean, here, you know, it's what else is the option than the Western art canon? You're part of that. But I think the important attempt, even though it was not well articulated, and I think art historians at that time didn't understand it, was this big possibility of this introduction of arts from other parts of the world, which I think here did not really go beyond the ethnographic objects and so, because when this it's gone. But when these exchanges happen, you know, it's interesting that when you read this, what they were discussing, the museum directors, how they will send various works to various countries, it's very strange, because they say, for example, we will not send anything to Sudan because, you know, they don't have good galleries, they don't understand our art. We will send, I don't know, some, what did they send? I think they sent to Ethiopia, they sent reproduction of frescoes from Serbian churches or something like that, you know. So, but then they sent, very often they sent graphics because it was easy to transport, and sometimes these graphics, they traveled for a year or two, and then sometimes our diplomats, they really did not care too much, but then you read in this, because everything is well preserved, all these discussions and all this correspondence. They said, okay, I know it was the case in Latin America, there was this traveling show of the graphics, Yugoslav graphics. They said, okay, there was one visit, so we just took one graphic and give it as a gift, please notify artists, pay him something. Or they say, okay, so it's been 2 years, everything's destroyed, make sure the artists get refound, things like that. And you read everything in these notes. It's very interesting. But then when the works exchange exhibitions were coming from Africa, from other parts to Yugoslavia, they were not shown in art museums. In Museum Moderne Галерија, we don't have, I checked all the exhibitions that they were there from 1947 on, there was not a single exhibition of any artist, contemporary artists from any non-aligned countries. They were all sent to ethnographic museums. Art museum,
Yeah, well, I would ask, like, in those years, Yugoslavia was trying to, let's say, one thing is not, let's westernized, but modernized, to reach the economy and the intellectual level of the, let's say, more developed countries, which were, yes, the Western countries, but also Yugoslavia helped to modernize all the non-modern countries, which were let's say the ones who were, let's say, one part of the countries in the non-aligned. So how did of course, with the fact that, let's say, all citizens from those countries came to study science mostly in Yugoslavia, or engineers from Yugoslavia were sent there to teach all, let's say, scientific, to develop them technologically or intellectually, and how the art from Yugoslavia, which also was used to, let's say, as a propaganda to, let's say, switch the from believing God to use science in Yugoslavia, but then how much it used to modernize the rest, the other countries from the non-aligned.
History.
So the story, I think the story of Yugoslav engagement in terms of economies and architecture and building infrastructure infrastructure is already quite well researched. I think there's some people in the region that are doing that. I know Dubravka Sekulic, she was also included at exhibitions. She did all this research also for her PhD about the Energo projects, involvement in various countries, non-aligned countries. And I think I mean, I'm not specialist in that, so maybe I'll say something wrong probably. But what it was important, and also talking to Dubravka, was that first of all the newly decolonized countries, liberated countries from the colonial regimes, they did not want to work with their colonial, how do you say?
Colonialists.
Huh?
With the colonialists.
Yes, so they rather work with someone who did not have that history, and Yugoslavia in this regard was a perfect partner. Because the idea was also in this newly decolonized countries to develop, to modernize, but it was important to do it on their own terms.
But no, I think art as a propaganda of system of values. How, let's say, art from Yugoslavia, which is the most, not Western, but modernized from the group, how this art as a message of system of values did it spread through the other countries of the non-aligned. Because, for example, also Yugoslavia accepted abstract expressionism to say we are more free than the rest of the Soviet bloc, or other, let's say, Western.
Oh, I think these questions are so complex.
Okay.
Yes. Let me see. I mean, of course, this is a large part of the question of cultural diplomacy. Because also, maybe in your question, the artworks were also given to the foreign diplomats, and it was very carefully selected what kind of artworks to whom.
Yeah.
And then you have in the Museum of Yugoslavia, you have the list of all these artworks, and they had special curators who actually took care of that. Let's see, I know one thing for sure, and we did some research on this exchange of gifts between Yugoslavia and Indonesia, or some exhibition that we did in Netherlands. And it's interesting because Sukarno, supposedly, and then you can also find this in notes, really liked women. So what they sent as gifts and artworks were nudes, either in sculpture or painting. So they have I think there are 8 or 9 artworks, important artists at that time, from here. I cannot think of a single one now from hand, but they're from my head, but they're important ones. I know because I look at the list. And they sent these nudes to Indonesia. So they're there, and the friend who was working in the museum there and came across this collection, she was really appalled, how was that from Yugoslavia, all these nudes, they come. But then, from the discussions and from the correspondence, you see that that's actually the case. So they realized Sukarno is fond of that, so they could choose artworks.
Maybe it's also anti-religious or anti-Muslim.
No, don't think of emancipatory, no, they just wanted Sukarno to be the...
Okay.
And now,
I think you had a very deterministic theological description of Yugoslavia's presence in the non-aligned. It was a part of interest, bargaining, trading. It was not this much of a very heavy emancipation that made all this now very easy.
Maybe I can add to this. Like, for example, there was this side of it. But for example, the realization of what I found from our archives. Like, for example, the Stumica art colony and also the Trileb art colony were really crucial in Yugoslavia, especially in Macedonian context. But there is a statement and several kind of personal statements from people that worked there that this collaboration didn't work actually. Like people come, some foreigner comes here, there's nobody to kind of welcome him because they don't know the language so much, English is not so developed, so they come, mix, mingle for a while, but nothing stays for a longer period of time, you know, just go and leave. So there is this other side of this story, although on official level there were many exhibitions happening, and there is something, I guess, some progressive left over from that. But I don't want to actually ask, just to correct that.
No, but socialism had a particular idea about art and culture. You know, and I wanted to hear your thought about it, because it was not, it was supposed to be emancipatory. It was, you know, Yugoslavia was more free than other socialist countries, but it still had particular ideas of aesthetic and especially, I mean, especially in this romanticizing. I mean, in Kosovo we have this problem of, in general, of romanticizing non-aligned movement, because it really, you know, it really prettifies and romanticizes Yugoslavia, and it doesn't see the structural inequalities that existed within, and the colonialism that existed within. I mean, the others of Yugoslavia were Albanian, Bosniaks, and Roma. And you know, I'm also wondering in all this set, I mean, is anybody from Pristina or some artists from Kosovo represented in this art that you find in archives?
In the non-aligned context or in the collection?
Or, I mean, I recently looked a little bit at our collection and our archives. I didn't see anybody coming from online in Pristina at that time. I need to look more carefully at it, but I think it's interesting to see how, you know, it still speaks to certain centers. It just spoke to, you know, Ljubljana, Zagreb, and Belgrade. And this was a big problem with Yugoslavia, really not including the sort of the south. In general.
Just in addition to this, because I think it was actually the thing that you brought up, the internal colonial tendencies inside Yugoslavia, and it's important because you're from Slovenia, that one talk we had many years ago with Močnik, actually it was his lecture in Zagreb 20 years ago, and he said that it was the Slovene kind of segment of intellectuals and artists that were kind of one of the only ones in Yugoslavia who raised the question of colonialism inside Yugoslavia, especially.
Well, yeah, that's quite possible, but that's, I don't know what decade was there when they raised, because I know in the 80s there were a lot.
87, 88.
87, yeah, that's for sure. But we are here maybe discussing because in the 80s all this story of non-aligned is connected to this selling arms to poor African countries, etc., Mamula. So yeah, but what you say, it's true, this romanticizing of non-aligned. When you start researching, of course, you start from that perspective, but then when you go through everything, all this, you know, you lose this romantic moment. It's very, like you say, it's negotiated all the time. It's this and that, and trades and arms and bargaining, and that's the only who sells arms to anyone. I mean, you know, all the time. But in terms of Pristina, I could check. I've never been, because we focused on Moderne галерија more or less. But there are all these transcripts, and I know many art institutions were involved in these exchanges. I know that the Rijeka was involved, the Banja Luka was involved. So for sure, there were some from Kosovo too. But I can check. I think it would be interesting, for example.
Interesting.
Yeah, because we have this in Moderne галерија, we have quite so many transcripts because of the graphic biennial. And maybe if, you know, there will be some possibility one day to do more focused, also relation to non-aligned, and also maybe we could drag something out like you did when you did the Macedonian research for the collection, for the exhibition that we did. I think it's very particular. You have to dig and you have to know what you're looking for. Otherwise, you go to the archives of Yugoslavia, there's just boxes, enormous, meters and meters of those boxes. And you need to know really what you are looking for.
I get a show.
Sorry?
I had a question.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how do you apply the whole values and principles, especially the last slide that you showed, on how to perform today decolonial practice in art institutions. And one important segment that was to dissituate, probably I'm just interpreting it, yourself from the tendencies of what centers of power dictate. And how does this relate to the fact that, and the question is, when you speak of decolonizing art institutions, when you mean institutions, do you mean institutions that are under the confines of the state? Because if they are, then, okay, I mentioned the state and then this is all.
You said the state, the state.
Do you think that, given the fact that we're seeing how the political tendency of the state is developing, let's say in Europe, in our region, is it becoming harder and harder to perform such decolonial practices through the established state institutions, or do you think that we should venture into the other social forms of institutions which might be more valuable in investing resources, time, energy practices, rather than state institutions which have become more and more problematic, as we see in the first instance where this could be practiced with the Palestine case, it became the absolute worst case scenario.
Yeah.
This doesn't.
I mean, these are all.
Yeah, just like
Yeah, speak freely.
Speak bit of that.
They cannot record this, so now you can say whatever.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's a very interesting concept. I a little bit forgot about it, but it came up in early 2000 in Spain. Because in Spain, we were thinking at that time, it was time before this major crisis in 2008, they were thinking about different kinds of art institutions too, but very much related this experience to the movements, social movements of Latin America, Zapatismos, etc., and also to social movements in Spain. So they said, they came up with this concept of a monster institution. A monster institution would be something like a combination of art institutions and social movements, and how can they, like, not empower, what would be the word? How could these experiences from both institutions be made? Yes, intertwined. So that was an interesting concept, and it was especially powerful in Barcelona and in Madrid. But then, of course, with the crisis, and then with things turning more conservative, we did a small attempt of that in Ljubljana, too, in Mодерна галерија. We had a small collective that was called Radical Education Collective, very much based on this idea. We worked a lot with our Spanish colleagues, but what we wanted to do in the museum is open it up in a way to invite other political constituents into the museum. So we started working with the social center. This was a rock social center that doesn't exist anymore. A lot with the migrant workers from Bosnia. They were very much present. So, and then the question, and then we also at one point had, people from Kosovo, Piškur and Malici, in the museum, being taking part of this Radical Education Collective discussions. And the idea was how to bring this political experience also to the art institution, you know. So it was not easy, because all the time there was some kind of doubt, is what we're doing, just another attempt of institution to brand all these political subjectivities. But when you're insistent and you work for a long time and you actually make yourself present at social movements and discussions and debates, then what matters is the trust. But then all this idea is also finished. So it's time for something else. I don't know. It's a very crucial moment, I think, now. What is happening in Europe, what is happening in institutions in the West, what is happening especially in institutions in Germany.
This day we have a couple of glasses of wine, and then we can continue the conversation in informal atmosphere.
You have wine?